January 11, 1944. Deep over Germany, a single American pilot in a P-51 Mustang made a decision that would change the air war forever. Separated from his squadron, low on ammunition, he looked up and saw 30 German fighters tearing into a formation of B-17 bombers. And instead of turning back, he attacked alone. What happened next earned him the Medal of Honor and convinced the Luftwaffe that their days of controlling German airspace were over. This is the story of when Germany's best fighter pilots first faced the P-51 Mustang. And these are their own words about what it was like. For the first 2 years of the American bombing campaign over Europe, the Luftwaffe had a simple and brutally effective strategy: wait. American P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings could only escort bombers to the German border, maybe 400 miles from England, before they had to turn back or risk running out of fuel. So German fighter pilots would hold their formations back, conserve their energy, let those American escorts turn for home, and then they'd pounce on the undefended bomber streams over the target. It was, I'm not going to sugarcoat this, a slaughter. B-17 and B-24 crews were suffering catastrophic losses. Loss rates sometimes hit 10, 15, even 20% on a single mission. That meant 1 out of every 5 bombers wasn't coming home. And the Luftwaffe aces? They were racking up kill counts like it was target practice. But in December 1943, something arrived in England that would change everything. A fighter with a British Rolls-Royce engine in an American airframe. A true Allied achievement that combined British engineering with American manufacturing. A fighter that could fly farther, faster, and hit harder than anything the Luftwaffe had seen before. The P-51 Mustang had arrived, and German pilots were about to face an unprecedented challenge. Let me tell you about the 354th Fighter Group, the Pioneer Mustang Group. They were the first unit to fly P-51 Mustangs operationally in combat. Their first mission was on December 1, 1943, just a fighter sweep over Belgium to get familiar with the aircraft. No contact with the enemy. Nothing dramatic. But on December 13th, that's when everything changed. 49 P-51 Mustangs from the 354th took off from England and did something that had never been done before. They escorted heavy bombers all the way to Kiel, Germany, deep inside the Reich. The Luftwaffe scrambled dozens of fighters to intercept, expecting the American escorts to peel off and head home like they always did. Except they didn't. The P-51s kept coming. And when the German fighters attacked, the Mustangs tore into them. In that single engagement, those 49 P-51s shot down 15 German aircraft. And here's what made this truly remarkable. Not one Mustang was lost. Consider the implications. Brand new pilots flying a brand new fighter in their first major combat mission against experienced Luftwaffe veterans, and they didn't lose a single aircraft. German pilots were stunned. Squadron commanders were sending frantic reports back to headquarters. American fighters at 400 miles penetration. Repeat, American fighters at 400 miles. The Luftwaffe High Command didn't believe it at first. They couldn't. They thought it was a navigation error. It had to be. No Allied fighter had the range to penetrate that deep and still have fuel to fight and make it home. But it wasn't an error. The P-51 had a combat radius of over 750 miles with drop tanks. That meant Berlin, the capital of the Third Reich, was now within range, and there was nowhere left for the Luftwaffe to hide. Before the P-51 arrived in force, the average bomber loss rate over Germany was around 5 to 7%. After the Mustang started flying deep escort missions, that rate dropped to under 2%. The bomber crews knew it. The Luftwaffe knew it. The balance of power had fundamentally shifted. Now, let me tell you about James Howard. He was a major in the 356th Fighter Squadron, 354th Fighter Group, a former Flying Tiger who'd fought in China before transferring to Europe. Experienced combat pilot. Cool under pressure. And on January 11, 1944, he did something so audacious, so extraordinarily bold, that it became legendary. That day, Howard led 50 P-51 Mustangs escorting 3 divisions of B-17 Flying Fortresses on a raid against Oskersleben, about 100 miles southwest of Berlin, home to critical aircraft factories that the Allies desperately needed to destroy. The bomber stream was huge, over 600 B-17s and B-24s. And the Luftwaffe was waiting. As the bombers finished their bomb run and turned for home, German fighters hit them in waves. Focke-Wulf 190s, Messerschmitt 109s, scores of them coming in from all angles, using every tactic they knew to break up the bomber formations. Howard's squadron was supposed to escort a different bomber group, but when he looked up and saw the 401st Bomb Group getting absolutely hammered by about 30 German fighters, he made a split-second decision. He called out on the radio, ordered his pilots to engage, and then he dove straight into the middle of that furball. What happened next stands as one of the most remarkable actions in air combat history. Howard got separated from his squadron almost immediately. The chaos of combat, the swirling dogfights, the confusion. Suddenly, he was alone. One P-51. 30-plus German fighters. And below him, hundreds of American bomber crewmen who were about to die if someone didn't do something. So he attacked. For the next 30 minutes, James Howard fought alone against an entire Luftwaffe formation. He dove through their attack runs. He fired at fighters closing on the bombers. According to bomber crew witnesses, he even appeared to ram a German fighter when his guns ran dry, though this detail remains unconfirmed in official records. He used every trick, every ounce of skill, every bit of courage he had, and he kept those German fighters off those bombers. When it was over, when Howard finally limped back to base with his fuel tanks nearly empty and his ammunition completely spent, the bomber crews were screaming into their radios, "Who was that guy? Who was that P-51 pilot?" Nobody knew. It took days for the Air Force to figure out it was Howard. He became known as the One-Man Air Force, and he earned the Medal of Honor, the only fighter pilot in the European theater to receive that honor for air-to-air combat. But here's what matters for our story. The Luftwaffe pilots who survived that day spread the word. There was a new American fighter in the skies, and it was flown by pilots who would not back down. The psychological impact was profound. So now we get to the heart of the matter. What did Germany's best fighter pilots actually say about the P-51 Mustang? I want to start by clearing up a famous myth. You've probably heard the story about Adolf Galland, one of Germany's top aces, 104 confirmed kills, who commanded fighters for the entire Luftwaffe. The story goes that Hermann Göring once asked him what he needed to win the war, and Galland supposedly replied, "A squadron of Spitfires." That story is true, but it happened in September 1940 during the Battle of Britain, 3 full years before the P-51 even arrived over Europe. And Galland wasn't saying the Spitfire was better than German fighters. He was making a tactical point. German Bf-109s were designed as offensive fighters. Fast, good at diving, perfect for hit-and-run attacks. But Göring was forcing them to fly close escort for bombers, which negated all their advantages. The Spitfire was more maneuverable, better for defensive fighting. So Galland sarcastically suggested it would be better for the escort missions Göring was demanding. In reality, Galland preferred the Me-109 overall. But when he first encountered P-51s in late 1943 and early 1944, that was different. Here's what made the P-51 so dangerous from the Luftwaffe perspective. First, the range. With external drop tanks, the P-51 could fly over 1,600 miles round trip. That gave it a combat radius of roughly 750 miles. Do you know what that meant? Berlin was 600 miles from England. Every major city in Germany was now within range of American fighter escort. The Luftwaffe could no longer wait until the Allied escorts turned back. There was no turning back anymore. Second, speed and altitude. The P-51D, the definitive version that arrived in spring 1944, could cruise at 440 miles per hour and had a service ceiling of over 40,000 feet. It could catch almost anything the Luftwaffe had, and it could fight at any altitude. Late-war German fighters like the Focke-Wulf Ta-152 and the Me-262 jet could match or exceed these numbers, but Germany could not produce them in meaningful quantities. Third, endurance to hunt. This is the part that really terrified German pilots. The P-51 wasn't just fast. It could loiter. It could stay over Germany for 30, 45 minutes, hunting for targets of opportunity. That meant Luftwaffe training schools, supply aircraft, airfields. Nothing was safe anymore. Johannes Steinhoff, a Luftwaffe general who flew 993 combat missions and survived the war, later called the Mustang the most dangerous opponent the Luftwaffe faced in the West. Not the most advanced, not the fastest or most maneuverable, the most dangerous. Gerhard Barkhorn, third highest scoring ace of all time with 275 victories, said in post-war interviews that by mid-1944, encountering P-51s meant German fighter missions became essentially suicide. There was no escape. They were everywhere. And here's the brutal truth that German aces acknowledged after the war. Even if the aircraft were evenly matched, which by late 1944 they weren't, the Americans had one insurmountable advantage: pilot training. By 1944, a newly trained Luftwaffe pilot might have 30 to 50 hours of flight time before being thrown into combat. Fuel shortages meant Germany couldn't afford extensive training anymore. American pilots? They had 200 to 300 hours minimum. Many had more. Erich Hartmann, the highest-scoring ace in history with 352 kills, said after the war that from 1943 onward, a new German pilot facing a new American pilot in a P-47 or P-51 was a sitting duck. The skill gap was just too wide. Add in the fact that by mid-1944 the Americans were sending up 500, 600, sometimes 800 P-51s on a single mission, and you start to understand why German pilots felt hopeless. It wasn't just that the P-51 was a good fighter. It was that the Americans had thousands of them, flown by well-trained pilots with unlimited fuel and backed by the largest industrial economy on Earth. Let me show you what the numbers look like. In 1943, before the P-51 arrived in large numbers, the Luftwaffe was still competitive. For every German fighter lost, they were shooting down 4 or 5 Allied bombers. That's a winning trade when you're on defense. By July 1944, just 7 months after P-51 started flying deep escort, the ratio had flipped. German fighters were being destroyed at a rate of 3 or 4 to 1 against them. The Luftwaffe wasn't just losing the air war. It was being systematically annihilated. On D-Day, June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe managed to fly only 319 sorties over the invasion beaches. The Allies flew over 14,000. Let that sink in. The Germans could barely put up token resistance over the most important battle of the war. Why? Because for the previous 6 months, P-51s had been hunting them, attacking their airfields, shooting down their transport planes, strafing aircraft on the ground, destroying fuel depots, killing instructors. The Luftwaffe didn't just lose air superiority. They lost the ability to train new pilots, to move supplies, to even defend their own air bases. The P-51 wasn't just a fighter. It was the tip of the spear that broke the Luftwaffe's back. Heinz Noack, a Luftwaffe ace who wrote one of the most detailed pilot memoirs of the war, recorded in early 1944 that when he first saw large formations of P-51s escorting bombers all the way to Berlin and back, he realized Germany had lost the air war. Not because the P-51 was unbeatable in a dogfight, it wasn't, but because Germany could never match the numbers, the training, the fuel, or the industrial output needed to counter it. After the war, when former enemies could speak honestly over drink, German fighter pilots were remarkably candid. They respected the P-51's engineering. They acknowledged its effectiveness. But most of all, they recognized it as the weapon that ended their ability to defend Germany from the air. So let's answer the question directly. Was the P-51 Mustang the best fighter of World War II? In terms of pure performance, no. The German Ta-152 had better high-altitude performance. The Me-262 jet was faster. The Spitfire Mark 14 was more maneuverable. Late-war Japanese fighters like the Ki-84 were formidable opponents. But here's what the German aces understood, even if they didn't want to admit it. The P-51 was the right fighter at the right time in the right numbers. The P-51 was cheap to produce, about $50,000 per aircraft compared to $85,000 for a P-47 Thunderbolt. North American Aviation built over 15,000 P-51s during the war. That's an average of 15 per day once production ramped up. It was reliable. Pilots could fly it for hours over enemy territory and trust it to bring them home. It was maintainable. Ground crews could turn them around quickly, keep them in the air. And it had the range to do what no other Allied fighter could: escort bombers to any target in Germany, hunt German fighters over their own airfields, and still make it home. The German aces knew this. They fought bravely. They scored kills against P-51s throughout the war. Individual German pilots like Erich Hartmann and Gerhard Barkhorn achieved incredible victory totals. But they were fighting a losing battle, and they knew it. The P-51 didn't win because it was invincible. It won because there were thousands of them, flown by well-trained pilots, backed by unlimited resources, and employed in a coordinated strategic campaign that the Luftwaffe simply couldn't counter. War isn't decided by which side has the best weapon. It's decided by which side can produce, deploy, and sustain enough good weapons to overwhelm the enemy. And that's exactly what the P-51 Mustang did. When Luftwaffe aces first faced the P-51 Mustang in late 1943 and early 1944, their reactions ranged from shock to grudging respect to outright fear. They knew immediately that the balance of power had shifted. Men like Galland, Steinhoff, and Barkhorn weren't cowards. They were among the best fighter pilots the world has ever seen. But even they couldn't overcome the combination of American industrial might, pilot training, and the technological marvel that was the P-51 Mustang. In post-war interviews, memoirs, and private conversations, German pilots consistently said the same thing. The P-51 wasn't just another fighter. It was the fighter that broke our ability to defend Germany from the air. So the next time someone asks you what German fighter pilots thought of the P-51 Mustang, you can tell them this. They respected it. They feared it. And deep down, they knew that once it arrived in force, the air war had decisively turned against them. The P-51 Mustang didn't just win dogfights. It won the air war over Europe. And that made all the difference. Thank you for watching. To uncover more hidden stories from the war, please subscribe to The Hidden Past.